Good morning. How are you all today? Thank you for visiting with us, and we're continuing to study from the book of First Kings. Today we're in chapter 7, and we'll be looking at the furnishings of the temple. In chapter 6, the temple was finished. It took 7 years for the temple to be built. But we'll see in this chapter 7 that it takes another 6 years for Solomon's personal house to be built. And so we began our studies today in 1 Kings chapter 7. But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. Verse 2. He built also the house of the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits, upon 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams upon the pillars. Now, this chapter is going to be what I call boring, because it'll give a lot of measurements and dimensions and such and furnishings. But because the Word of God is precious and we're establishing that the Word of God is true, then we'll read through this chapter and we'll continue throughout the book of 1 Kings and go from there. So cedar is an evergreen tree, and the wood of the cedar is the most valuable kind, not so much more valuable, but it's a kind of wood that repel insects and decay. And so the house of Lebanon is the house where military weapons are kept. And so verse 3 says, and it was covered with cedar above upon the beams of the logs that lay on 45 pillars, 15 in a row. Verse 4. And there were windows in 3 rows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. Verse 5. And all the doors and posts were square with the windows, and light was against light in 3 ranks. Verse 6. And he made a porch or courtyard of pillars. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth thereof 30 cubits. And the porch was before them, and the other pillars and the thick beams were before them. Verse 7. Then he made a porch for the throne where he might judge, even the porch of judgment. And it was covered with cedar from one side of the floor to the other. So this was a place set aside for him to bring judgment as the people came before him. Verse 8. And his house where he dwelt had another court within the porch, which was of the like work of the same makings. Solomon made also an house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken to wife, like unto this porch. Verse 9. All these were of costly stones, according to the measures of hewn or shaped stones, shaped before they were placed in the temple. With saws, within and without, inside and out, even from the foundation unto the coping of the top, and so on the outside toward the great court. Verse 10. And the foundation was of costly stones, even great stones, stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. Verse 11. And above were costly stones after the measures of hewn stones and cedars. Verse 12. And the great court round about was with 3 rows of hewn stones and a row of cedar beams, both for the inner court of the house of the Lord and for the porch of the house. That is the inner court, the outer court, and the temple proper. In these spaces, the Jews of the nation Israel could come in the inner court, and Gentiles could come to the outer court. Verse 13. And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. Now, this Hiram is not the king Hiram. This is a young man who is very skilled in craftsmanship and building. Verse 14. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and brass denotes judgment. And he was filled, this young man was filled with wisdom and understanding, and skillful or cunning to work all works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought or made all his work. Verse 15. For he cast 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high apiece, and a line or a measuring line of 12 cubits did compass it or encircle either of them about both the pillars round about. Verse 16. And he made 2 chapiters or columns or pillars. Well, they were on top of the pillars. They were ornaments on top of a pole or a pillar. Verse 16, and he made 2 chapiters of molten brass to set up on the tops of the pillars. The height of one chapiter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other chapiter was 5 cubits. And nets of checkerwork and wreaths of chain work for the chapiters, which were upon the top of the pillars, 7 for the one chapiter and 7 for the other chapiter. And when we're looking at all these furnishings, we're seeing the beauty, the holiness, the precious righteousness that portrays Jesus and his church being portrayed as a bride without spot or wrinkle. Verse 18. And he made the pillars and 2 rows round about upon one network to cover the chapiters that were upon the top with pomegranates, speaking of fruitfulness, and so did he for the other chapiter. So God is balanced. He made one side as he made the other. Verse 19. And the chapiters that were upon the top of the pillars were of lily work, speaks of pureness, in the porch 4 cubits. Now 1 cubit equals 18 inches, so I don't know how to calculate how tall these were, but they were tall. Verse 20. And the chapiters upon the 2 pillars had pomegranates also above, over against the belly of the middle, which was by the network. The temple had 3 stories, first, second, and third. And the pomegranates, this is verse 20 again, and the pomegranates were 250 in rows round about upon the other chapiter. Verse 21. And he set up the pillars in the porch of the courtyard of the temple. And he set up the right pillar and called the name thereof Jachin, which means he shall establish, and called the name there. And he set up the left pillar and called the name thereof Boaz, which means in it is strength. Verse 22. And upon the top of the pillars were lily work. So was the work of the pillars finished. Verse 23. And he made a molten sea, 10 cubits from the one brim to the other. It was round all about. It's like a tub. And his height was 5 cubits, and a line of 30 cubits, or a measuring line of 30 cubits, did compass it round about or surround it. Verse 24. And under the brim of it round about there were knops or ornamental protrusions, were knops compassing it, 10 in a cubit, compassing the sea round about. The knops were cast in 2 rows when it was cast. And this molten sea stood upon 12 oxen, verse 25, looking toward the north, 3 looking toward the north, and 3 looking toward the west, and 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east, in every direction. And the sea was set, or the molten sea was set above upon them, that is, upon the oxen, and all the hinder parts were inward. So they're like this and going out and looking in each direction. Verse 26, and it was an handbreadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, with flowers of lilies. It contained 2,000 baths or liquid measures. And he made 10 bases of brass. 4 cubits was the length of one base, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, and 3 cubits the height of it. Verse 28. And the work of the bases was on this manner. They had borders, and the borders were between the ledges. Verse 29, and on the borders that were between the ledges were lions, oxen, and cherubims. And upon the ledges there was a base above, and beneath the lions and the oxen were certain additions made of the thin work. Verse 30, and every base had 4 brazen wheels, and plates of brass, and the 4 corners thereof had undersetters. Under the laver were undersetters molten, all brass, at the side of every addition. Verse 31. And the mouth of it, the opening of it within the chapter was above, and above was a cubit. But the mouth thereof was round after the work of the base, 1.5 cubits. And also upon the mouth of it were gravings or engravings with their borders, 4 square, not round. 32. And under the borders were 4 wheels, and the axle trees of the wheels were joined to the base. And the height of a wheel was 1.5 cubits, half a cubit. Verse 33. And the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel. Their axle trees, their naves, and their felloes, and their spokes were all molten. Verse 34. And there were 4 undersetters to the 4 corners of one base. And the undersetters were of very the undersetters were of the very base itself. And in the top of the base was there a round compass of half a cubit high. And on the top of the base, the ledges thereof and the borders thereof were of the same. For on the plates of the ledges thereof and on the borders thereof, he, that is Hiram, the young man, engraved cherubims, lions, and palm trees, according to the proportion of every one, and additions round about. After this manner he made the 10 bases. All of them had one casting, one measure, and one size. Verse 38. Then made he 10 lavers of brass. One laver contained 40 baths. This was like tubs. And every laver was 4 cubits. And every one of the 10 bases, one laver. Verse 39. And he put 5 bases on the right side of the house, and 5 on the left side of the house. And he set the sea of the molten sea on the right side of the house eastward, over against the south. Verse 40. And Hiram made the lavers and the shovels and the basins. So Hiram made an end of doing all the work that he made King Solomon for the house of the Lord. 41. The 2 pillars and the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were on top of the 2 pillars, and the 2 networks to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters which were upon the top of the pillars. Verse 42. And 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, even 2 rows of pomegranates for 1 network to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were upon the pillars, and the 10 bases and the 10 lavers on the bases, and 1 sea and 12 oxen under the sea. So this is just a summary of all the articles that was made. Verse 45. And the pots and the shovels and the basins and all these vessels which Hiram made to King Solomon for the house of the Lord were of right brass. Again, brass means judgment. Verse 46. And Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because they were exceeding many. Neither was the weight of the brass found out. When Jesus paid our sin debt, he took the judgment that we deserve, and the cost of that cannot be counted. And so this brass was, and all the articles was not found out. Verse 48. And Solomon made all the vessels that pertain unto the house of the Lord, the altar of gold and the table of gold whereupon the showbread was, and the candlesticks of pure gold, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left, before the oracle of the most holy place, with flowers and the lamps and the tongs of gold. Verse 50, and the bowls and the snuffers and the basins and the spoons and the censers of pure gold, and the hinges of gold, both for the doors of the inner house and the most holy place, for the doors of the house, to be exact, of the temple. Verse 51. So was ended all the work that the King Solomon made for the house of the Lord. And Solomon brought in the things which David his father had dedicated, even the silver and the gold and the vessels did he put among the treasures of the house of the Lord. And so now, next time, we'll see the glory of the Lord enter the temple. We'll see Solomon's prayer, and we'll see that he gave a sermon before he prayed. So next time, we'll be looking forward to seeing you all and visiting with you again. You all have a great day and a great week. Bye.